Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here with some more videos from this excellent book on the Great Plains by Walter Prescott Webb. And we're going to start with chapter 4 called The Spanish Approach to the Great Plains. A long time ago I was doing videos on ancient Greece, and I pointed out the difference between the success that was enjoyed by Britain and the British system in the Americas, I should say, and the success enjoyed by the Spanish, where the Spanish came first, literally first, and then they came en masse first. And I don't know if you've ever stopped to think about the fact that 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, came way over 100 years prior to the first British expedition, which I think was 1607, but the first successful establishment was more like 1615 or 1620 or something like that. So more than 100 years, well over 100 years elapsed from the discovery of the Americas to the British getting over there. In that time, Spain and Portugal had done quite a lot, but how is it that their system ultimately failed? And to this day, the areas that inherited their system are abject failures compared with the British and Canadian, the American and Canadian experience since they came from Britain, minus Quebec, which is a basket case of French ideas. So, we're going to start on page 85. Just to kick the whole thing off right here. The Spaniards, quote, enjoyed unusual success as explorers, but they were notably unsuccessful as colonists. Their lack of success has often been attributed to conditions in Europe or some defect in the Spanish colonial system. I think that's kind of what it had to have been. Let's go forward with what he says. A re-examination of the evidence seems to indicate that the Spanish failure to take and hold the Great Plains may be attributed in large measure to the nature of the problems found within the country, not to the European situation. Now, he is focusing on the Great Plains because it's the book about the Great Plains, and this chapter is called The Spanish Approach to the Great Plains, but that is tangential to the information we're going to milk out of the chapter. So, we skip to the next page. There were Spanish settlements on both sides of the Great Plains, but none on the plains. Now there's a footnote that says, quote, throughout the 18th century, communication had been made impossible by hostilities of intervening Apache and Comanche tribes on the Great Plains. So they didn't settle on the Great Plains. They couldn't even cross the Great Plains. Okay? They rode round the Great Plains, and not sure where it is, we'll get to it later. It mentions 2 cities that you could just go between them, but the Spanish way was to go clear down through these mountains and skirt up, over, around, and back to this other major city, not even crossing the Great Plains. It's one thing to say that, I mean, they were militarily superior. It's one thing to say that they just didn't colonize it, but they wouldn't even go there. They were so damn scared of the Great Plains. We skip to the next page. We're on page 88 now. Spain's policy toward the American Indians was determined by a theory of government and a religious ideal. I'll pause for a second there. There's one of the key differences between the Spanish and the British way. The Spanish came over and were supervised from the top. Policies were set by kings or whoever, some important person, or the general in charge of this or that expedition. Whereas the British system was to let people come over and establish colonies and rule themselves, and the reason that they were leaving Britain was really to avoid religious persecution there during the reign of Charles I and all the hubbub that was going on there. A lot of people titling themselves pilgrims came over, and a pilgrim, as you know, is someone that goes on a religious journey, and they sort of were pilgrims in that sense. And the difference between the oversight and the absolute sort of dictatorial control, totalitarian control, exercised on the Spanish, on the people who came, versus the really free situation of the British who came and were just sort of dumped themselves off in the edge of this wilderness, a desert landscape as it's been called, not meaning dry, but meaning no one there and nothing there. Very, very different situations, but let us continue. The theory of government was almost identical with Roman imperialism, the Spanish theory of government. This meant that all authority and initiative issued from the crown. In territory outside the nation itself, the plan followed was, after the Roman fashion, not colonial, but provincial. Spain sought to conquer the provinces, to incorporate them into the Spanish state, and make the natives useful, if not loyal, Spanish subjects. Loyal? Useful? Yeah, for sure. They used them to mine gold and stuff, and so on. Superimposed upon the theory of government was the ideal of the universal church. Now remember, Spain had just won a very long, treacherous war against the Moors, the Muslims from northern Africa, and had just kicked them off of their bit of land. And they had won this, they saw, as a religious war. And who was on their side? God. Which God? Not Allah, but the Christian God. So now they're successful in reconquering their country. They have a massive military machine. They all of a sudden are in control of their realm, and they begin to spread outward, thinking that they are going to now spread the church all around the world, to every place. So if conquest, quote, if conquest was a necessity, conversion was a duty. They had to go out and conquer other lands, and they had to convert the people there. Now, Spain's fourfold purpose then was conquer, convert, exploit, right, get the gold. They were always about bringing gold back because of the mercantilist philosophy at the time. And then incorporate the native into their system. Now, their system being settled, agrarian, civilized, we might call it, wasn't really compatible with the nomadic nature of the people in the Great Plains. It worked much better with the sedentary people down in Mexico and in South America. So, the colonial policy, designed to effect this purpose, was peculiarly applicable to the docile and sedentary Indians of Mexico. It was not applicable to the nomadic and propertyless people who occupied and roamed the Great Plains. A people who could not be conquered, would not stay converted, had no property to confiscate, right, to the extent that they go there and they find heathens and they just take their gold and rob them. People on the Great Plains had nothing but, buffalo horns and stuff, buffalo skin and stuff. And the people on the plains steadfastly refused to produce any property that would be worth confiscating. These Indians were, moreover, protected from complete extermination by the theory of the universal church. Interesting fact here. Very important fact. Quote, here, the contrast with the English system that was worked out later on the Atlantic seaboard is marked. It's a marked contrast. The English depended for their success directly upon the fertility and the resources of the land they occupied. Okay, they landed there, and the Indians were, at the very least, a nuisance, and at the very most and best, someone that they could trade with and benefit from interaction with. But in no sense did the English depend upon the natives to produce for them. Trade with them maybe, but they didn't rob them and exploit them. They didn't enslave them and make them work their mines or anything like that. They simply tried to live and let live, trade with them if they could, and when there was a battle, they went to try to kill the Indians. Spain, on the other hand, depended only indirectly upon the soil and directly upon the productivity and wealth of the Indians. That's specifically what they were there to do. Quote, no Spaniard produced his own wealth through manual labor. End quote. So Spain